Good afternoon, community. It's just Jeremy. I'd like to share something with all of you today who may or may not be interested. I want to preface it though by saying I'm not a medical professional and I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I'm simply sharing our own personal journey and my own thoughts on something that I think is extremely important if we're going to move forward and change the world. So, what did we do, my wife and I? We had our second child at home, unassisted, in our tiny house. And the second time around only proved to me what I already intuitively knew to be capital T truth, and to my wife demonstrated that maybe, just maybe, our Creator actually knew what he, she, they, it were doing when we were created. Our bodies actually function in a way that doesn't really require a whole lot of assistance or fear or pain either. So I'll give you a little background. My wife and I moved to the Deep South 8 years ago from the Chicagoland area, and we came here to live a completely different lifestyle than the one that we did. And I'm going to give a little shout out here to Vladimir McGray, the author of a series of books that literally changed our lives. And those books were called The Ringing Cedars of Russia. If you never read anything in your life except for these books, there's 10 in the series, or 11 now, I cannot possibly recommend anything more than these books. Fabulous books. They explain everything from all that matters, everything. I mean, it gets into everything. Aliens, God, our origins, how we used to live, history. It's all in there. They're fabulous books. Anyway, that, and I'd also like to give a shout out to Ralph Smart at the Infinite Water Diving Deep channel. He's an inspiration. I love the guy. And if y'all have never checked him out, please do so. All right, with all that being said, my wife and I had our first child at home. Well, he wasn't our first. He was our third child, our first son, at home 5 years ago, as a sort of test and testament to the idea of getting back to doing things more in accordance with nature. And I would argue now, more than ever, as the world seems to quickly be degrading and spiraling out of what we would call normal control, or really it's exposing itself for what it is, which is a system built on lies, but that's for a different video. And doing more yourself, and from doing more yourself, from food production to doctoring to birthing and more yourself. It's a real world solution that you can actually do right now that doesn't require any special anything other than a lot of willingness and a lot of casting the fears of others and yourself aside and just doing something radical. The way that we went about our whole transition has been very radical, but there is a video about that on my page if you want to check that out. So I urge you to do so. Anyway, our birth here, I'm going to tell it from a father's perspective, because obviously I'm not the one who actually went through the childbirth, but having gone through two now, I have a fair amount of experience to draw from, and while it's still fresh in my mind, I'd like to share that with people who are endeavoring to do something similar. Now, first off, I said we did not do this with any assistance. We did not have a doula. We did not have a midwife. Midwifery is actually illegal in our state, or it was with our first child, so we just elected to educate ourselves and go at it on our own. This time around, we knew that we were not going to have assistance. We had a backup plan if something should go wrong, but just to be safe. But otherwise, we also did this even more so unassisted, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences both times. I really can't imagine now having a child, especially with the COVID crap going on. I can't even imagine having a child in a hospital setting. If you're the father, most likely you wouldn't be able to be present because only the mother would be admitted, and I'll do a whole separate video on the system and why it's a horrible idea to put yourself and your new baby into it. But for now, let's stick to the story of the actual birth. Actually, well, I'll give you even a little more background, and I mentioned the books, The Ringing Cedars, so read them to get the skinny on what I'm going to sort of give you the highlights of. My wife and I both had very clear intentions. This is the first child that we actually intended to have of 4, and we're 43, so we're not young in the sense of having children. But we decided this time that we would intentionally conceive and intentionally have a very specific image of who we wanted to share our space with. And that doesn't mean that we would not have been overjoyed had we had a daughter. We would have been just as happy either way, but this was something new that we tried that a lot of people rolled their eyes at, and unfortunately, since we didn't do it with Marshall, our first home birth, we don't have 2 coincidences to draw from, but with Escher, we absolutely intended to have a boy, and we got exactly what we intended, and we didn't find out with ultrasound or anything until he was actually with us that we had a boy. So that was cool. But when I say we intentionally conceived, we went into the act with the intention of conceiving a son, and one that was conceived in love, not in oops, we had an accident, or for any other reasons. We very specifically wanted to welcome our son to our space here, which is probably the most important radical thing that anyone can do, is find a space about 2 acres at least that you can call your own and interact with that space. Do everything you can within that space that introduces you to it and it to you, and grow food in it, forage food that's already present. I promise you there's tons and tons of food in any 2-acre space just about anywhere on the planet, unless you're in the desert or in Antarctica or something like that. But even then, I would argue there's probably something that you can find in there. Where we are is subtropical nearly. It falls in that sort of zone, so there's no shortage of life here, and in fact that's probably the biggest challenge here, is to deal with all of the life present. But anyway, we were adamant about conceiving our child on our space and having our child on our space, and there's even more that went into that, and I'll share that as well. So the actual birthing process both times occurred in our home, which is a very small space. Our house is a grand total of about 600 and so square feet, but 288 of that are lofts, which are rooms for our children. So the actual main floor space is about 340 square feet. So it's small, and a lot of people can't even conceive having that many people in that small of a space. But we spend a whole lot of our life outside, far more of it than we do inside, and inside is very functional. We'll do a video on that too. But anyway, what I did is I cleared that room, cleaned it thoroughly before we knew that we were going to most people don't go, oh my God, I'm having a baby right now. There's a little bit of lead up to it. Although Escher was a little more of a surprise than Marshall or any of the other children that we had, the more conventional way. And I do want to start out by saying our first child was had about as conventional as possible, in a hospital setting with an epidural and every appointment that could ever be imagined gone to, and we even started vaccinating with her. That was really what that whole process opened my eyes to vaccines and the realities of them. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm not a pro-vaxxer, I'm a pro-choice person. I should have the choice to choose what I put in my body, and even more importantly, what gets put in the bodies of my children. So I'm not going to wade off into that circle of an argument. Um, Educate yourself. Do not take the words of others unless you're listening to someone like Robert Kennedy, who gives multiple sources for you to make your own decisions. Don't listen to so-called authorities on the matter. Do your own homework, because ultimately any problems that may arise from vaccination is on you. You can't sue the drug manufacturer, you can't sue a doctor or a healthcare provider or anyone else who so-called mandates that you vaccinate yourself or your child. There is no such thing as a mandatory vaccine, but again, I'd be happy to share multiple sources of law for that if anyone should require it. But anyway, back to the actual story. Sorry, I digress. I thoroughly cleaned the space. We had multiple materials present to catch any birthing liquids or anything that might, like freak out people. And there really isn't a lot of blood present if the whole thing is done naturally. Lori's water did not like spontaneously burst or make a big giant mess. It was really all very slow and deliberate. Lori went into labor, which what I would call labor, where she started having continual contractions at about 3 in the morning. And when I got up to do the regular morning routine of animal chores and such, she let me know that, hey, this was going to be the day, and that I probably might not want to think about going to work today, so I didn't. And we let our children help us, with breakfast and regular things, so it wasn't this like, oh my gosh, panic situation. Lori was able to control her contracting really by whether or not she was up and around or laying down. If she laid down, her contractions slowed to about 20 minutes apart. If she stood up, they sped up to as short as 5 or less minutes apart. So in that sense, Lori was in complete control of the actual delivery. It wasn't like she was incapacitated or in some kind of crazy pain. And I look forward to her telling her side of the story as well. But from my perspective, both times with Marshall and Escher, she was not in, like uncontrollable amounts of pain. Both with Marshall and with Escher, more so with Marshall even. Lori was very mindful of what she fed herself and how she took care of her body. Though we're not vegan or we don't seek to wear any of those sorts of label. We are primarily plant-based and mostly meatless. So I think that went a long way in keeping her body in the best possible shape for this process. And as I said earlier, we're not all that young in terms of birthing parents at 43. However, I would contend that we're in better shape than a whole lot of 30-somethings and even 20-somethings. Most people who give birth don't change their diet, or they give themselves a pass to eat worse. And for sure, I would avoid dairy and most meat if possible, if you're a pregnant mother or considering having a home birth. Lori used some specific Ayurvedic herbs for teas and such to limber up everything and prepare her body for the birthing process. Both with Marshall and with Escher, when it came time to the actual delivery, it was 2 to 3 good pushes, and we had the children, and both boys were with us, and those, by the third push, everything, and with that, with her pushes, water and birthing fluids were expelled from the mouth of both children and their nose. Then they came out in the proper position, and that also came from Lori educating herself on how to help both the children manipulate themselves into the sort of locked and loaded position, so that there wasn't a posterior or a breech birth or anything like that. And with Escher, it was less certain than it was with Marshall. We knew that Marshall was in the proper position, all along, and Escher was a lot more active in the womb. So Lori was concerned about that, and rightfully so. But both with Marshall and with Escher, the births were incredibly fast. From the time that we asked our children to go to my mother's place, who lives on the same space. We live on a large plot here, where we sort of share communally the space. But so we sent our children to my mother's house, and we got ready for the actual birthing process. That process took an hour, if that, from full on, okay, let's get ourselves in that mode, let's get ready, it's go time, till actual delivery. It was it was about an hour in both births. And with both births, the contractions were clearly intense, and I'm telling this from my perspective. Obviously, I don't actually know the feeling of it, but as someone who's in tune with energy in general, I literally felt the waves of energy contraction off of my wife's body. And my role in this as the birthing partner was to remain calm, to try to be as supportive and in tune with the needs of my wife as possible, and B, to help her literally assist that energy, the flowing of it, the movement of it, down her body and away from her. I am not a practitioner of Reiki or anything along those lines, even though I wholly believe in it. I literally just did what came intuitive to me, which was not really to even touch my wife, but to keep my hands very close to her or lightly touch her and help direct the energy down her spine and out and away from her. And I sort of adopted a mantra from a meditation that I do regularly, where I told her to open and allow. And there was a point in Escher's delivery where I would contend that Lori was a little concerned, that she was fatigued, and the pushing was more intense with him than it was with Marshall. Even though he was really about the same size, all of our children were roughly the same size, about 8 pounds, right around there. So it wasn't like he was a huge baby or anything like that. My wife is not a large woman, so that's everything sort of seems in size and shape for our particular body types. But anyway, the delivery of Escher was incredibly quick, which was a little different. I literally caught Marshall, and with Escher, he landed on our birthing pillow setup, if you will. But in both cases, I think the worst position that you could put your partner in is on her back in a bed. That makes the labor a lot more longer and I think more intense. Lori's intuition on all of it was to do the birth standing, and or squatting, which is actually how she delivered both Marshall and Escher were in a squatting position. And I'm assuming that everyone that's watching this are grown adults, and we're going to speak directly and frankly about it. And although I guess it could be funny, it's important to get a visual of how we personally chose to do this and what worked for us. But in both cases, I sat at a chair, and my wife used me as stability. She had her hands on my legs in both cases, and in both cases, when the really strong sort of productive pushing contractions occurred, she sort of went into her own headspace, and I was just present and sort of as an observer and a helper in any way, but not actively talking to her, not telling her to breathe. These are all things that we know to do, and if you're in a Lamaze or something like that, then adopt those breathings. I am big on yoga, and so mindful breathing was important for myself to stay calm, and for Lori to also sort of stay present. And in both cases, she delivered without incident. And really, I didn't physically get the same perspective of a visual this time with Escher as I did with Marshall. I mean, with Marshall, I saw the whole process from crowning to actual, expelling the baby into my hands, and the afterbirthing process, which is another really important thing to mention, because these are all things that I didn't know much about as a father of my first two children. Was the afterbirthing process, which is sort of like having a whole other baby all over again, from contractions to delivery and everything else. Although in a more traditional setting, the common knowledge is that if you don't expel the afterbirth in 30 minutes, then you are in danger, and that you need to seek immediate medical attention. And in both cases, for us, nothing could be further from the truth. And as we learned through our own research, the body is going through many processes within the mother that is ensuring the mother does not hemorrhage or find herself in any more pain than necessary. So in most settings, even with midwives, the midwife actually starts pushing on the stomach of the mother to expel the afterbirth as quickly as possible. I believe, and Lori, we believe through our own research, that is extremely dangerous and will actually increase the likelihood of bleeding and or tearing or something along those lines. And both cases with Marshall and Escher, I did not cut the cord for about 20 minutes. I did not cut the umbilical cord until it stopped pulsing and was basically limp and not really moving so much anymore. And in both cases, I used a very sharp sterilized knife. I know it's sort of weird to think about, but and in both cases there was very little blood. Which is what is so important, is there is a blood transfer going on from the mother to the baby, and the longer you can allow that, the more physical blood is actually in your baby, which is what you want all around. So in both cases, the actual cutting of the cord happened about 20 minutes into it, and in both cases the delivery of the placenta, and the first time it was a little over 4 hours, and in the second time it was closer to 6. So I mean, it was unnerving, and it's one of those things that I know from the wife's perspective, she would rather have done sooner than later. But what is going on is that placenta is detaching from the uterus, and literally there are blood vessels that are shutting themselves off, and all of this stuff is getting smaller and more contracted, and there are physical contractions just like birth contractions going on throughout this process, which again, if Lori stood up and nursed, the body sped up those processes. But with this particular delivery, I think she was a little more physically spent than the first time with Marshall, and so she was less inclined to get up and walk around and or carry the baby around. And both times there was no tearing or any damage to her body that wasn't part of the natural birthing process. So anyway, after the cord was cut and the baby was nursing, their immediate skin-to-skin contact with both Marshall and Escher, which was incredibly important in both cases. The only crying that they actually did during the birthing process was the delivery, and once they were on her chest, skin to skin, that stopped, and he started nursing pretty much right away, which started his internal processes. He pooed 3 or 4 of those real nasty first time baby poops, which is that's all great. Everything was working and functioning properly. So anyway, the actual delivery of the placenta happened, pretty long for what modern medicine would consider is the norm. And in both cases, she delivered something that was about the size of a softball, and it happened fairly easily and naturally once she could feel, internally that it was small and basically ready to go. And so in both cases, we took that placenta and we buried it on our property under a tree that we planted specifically for both children, which again is of importance that I'll let you, we can discuss later on, or you can discover for yourself. But in both cases, these deliveries produce an incredibly calm child. Both Marshall and Escher essentially slept through the night from day one. They both would wake up like once or so to eat and to go to the bathroom and be changed, but generally sleep, at about 4-hour increments at night. Which again, some people will say if you don't feed your child every 2 hours, then the child's not getting enough. I don't believe much of what official anything tells me these days, because as I actually do my own research and my own experimentation, my own self in our own lives, we learn that a lot of what we're told is not actually accurate at all. It's really a lot more conducive to a sort of factory-like production of getting you in a hospital where they can process you and pump you full of a whole lot of fake drugs, and or in my region, induce you and deliver the child via C-section so that the doctor can catch the football game on Saturday, because college ball is bigger here than pro ball. Anyway, I digress. But that is absolutely the case. Most people schedule their delivery and they do it in the least natural way possible. In this case, the delivery happened in the child's actual home in a loving and calm atmosphere. We had music playing in both cases, and this time was a daytime delivery, and Marshall's was a nighttime delivery. And with Marshall, we actually lit a signal fire so that our relatives could see from their vantage point that that was the signal. If they saw a fire, everything was good. In this particular case, we just sent texts out to everybody to let them know that everything went smoothly. But in both cases, I highly recommend doing some research. I clearly, you can't just go into this with like believing that everything will go smoothly and that there will be no issues. I think so many of the issues that you could encounter are 100% controllable, primarily through diet and how you feed yourself and how you mentally prepare. If you go into it with fear of pain and a fear of delivery, you are going to get that. I believe very strongly that well, I don't believe it, I know it from my own practice, that what you think is what you actually get in physical manifested experience. But that again is a topic for another video. But in this case, I couldn't have imagined a better delivery, a better setting. I couldn't have asked for anything to go better in either case. Everybody was happy and healthy, and Lori was back on her feet in a couple of days, and back to being her regular old motivated self. And so as of the making of this video, Escher is 5 days old, so it's still pretty fresh in memory. I'm sorry that it's incredibly hot out and muggy right now, so I'm a little, if I'm moving around or swatting at bugs, that's just kind of the normal thing here. But anyway, I really could not imagine birthing in a setting, in a hospital setting, or even a assisted, where it's even more natural facility. I totally understand, and I don't condemn anyone who does so. It's not something that we took lightly or that we did without lots of criticism from family members, but that's sort of our MO. A lot of people question a lot of our decision making and then later come around to, emulating it. So in this case, I really just am very much encouraging anyone that is even thinking about doing this to do their research and to connect with other people who have done this and have gone through it, and especially those who have had problems, so that it could prepare you for the potential of some sort of issue that you need to deal with. Otherwise, both of my experiences were incredibly positive and reassuring that what we did was the quote-unquote right call. Excuse me. I strongly recommend this sort of birth because I think it sets the stage for a child that is much more in tune and much more integrated into nature and the world that our Creator gave us to co-create within in the first place. So that's my story, and I hope that it is helpful to anyone that endeavors to try this on their own. I am absolutely willing to answer questions, and we'll also be sharing Lori's side of the story as well. But there is very little, especially on YouTube or otherwise, on this sort of way of birthing, and there is even less from the man's perspective. The most helpful thing that I came across was a blog from a gentleman that's no longer available, unfortunately, in Alaska, who had 4 children in their home, and 2 of those births were about as, I won't say terrible, but about as challenging as they could be, in the terms of, one was a breech delivery and another was the delivery with the cord wrapped around the child's neck very tightly, and so you need to prepare for that sort of thing and be able to react in a way that is positive and not just emotional, because it can be a very emotional moment. So anyway, that's it, and I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I love constructive comments, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that I can, and look for more homesteading / intentional living videos to come soon from this channel. Thank you, and please like and subscribe to us if you like what we're doing and you want to see more. Thanks, and have a great evening.